Welcome to Trinity Cathedral, and this is the 21st? Yes, 21st of April. We just had some considerable snow last night, so a late April snow, but it's going to melt. It's going to be beautiful just a few days from now. But to get back to the subject at hand, if you watched our video from last week, we gave a quick overview of why there are different keyboards on an organ, and how each keyboard is essentially the home base for a whole individual family group of sounds and stops. Those sounds are controlled by stop knobs. So we're going to, 1 week at a time, go through a little more in depth each keyboard family. We're going to start with the great, which is the backbone of any pipe organ, the great division. And on many American organs, the great plays on the second keyboard up from the bottom. So that is the case with this instrument here at Trinity. The great plays here on this second keyboard. And as I say, if you think of a human body, the great certainly would be the spine or the backbone of the sound of any pipe organ, with some of the most fundamental tones of the instrument. And those fundamental tones are usually called principal tone or diapason tone. That's an old Greek word, but they're sort of interchangeable, and we actually have both on our great division. But the principal tone is the characteristic sound of a pipe organ. It doesn't sound like a violin, doesn't sound like an oboe, doesn't sound like a trumpet. When you hear principal sound, you say, oh, that's an organ. So here is our principal 8 foot. We'll talk just a second from now about why it's 8 foot, but this is principal tone. Very characteristic sound of the pipe organ. If you look at each one of these knobs, there's not only a name, but there's a number. And 8 foot pitch, for instance, I was playing right there, principal 8. 8 foot pitch is the same as the pitch of a piano. It's what we would call normal keyboard pitch. And it's 8 foot because the length of that lowest pipe, the bottom note of the set, is, in this case, almost exactly 8 feet long, because the principal is an open stop. It's full length. So 4 foot, and then each pipe is getting longer down to 8 foot. So the stop numbers on these knobs come from the length of the lowest pipe in that set. So 8 foot pitch is standard keyboard pitch. 1 octave higher than that is 4 foot. 1 octave higher than that is 2 foot. 1 octave lower than 8 foot pitch is, you guessed it, 16 foot. And lots of 16 foot stops live in the pedal division, which we'll talk about in a future week. But 8 foot principal, and I'm going to hold the same set of 3 notes here, and I'm going to add the 4 foot principal. So you can hear it's 1 octave higher. It's as if I did that, but it's a different set of pipes doing it. Here's another octave higher, 2 foot. And octave lower is 16 foot. It's a fairly light sound. It's not as strong as the 8 foot, but organ stops often are designed to work together in families, just like orchestral sounds, just like the double bass and the cello and the viola and the violin in the orchestra. So 8 foot principal, 4 foot principal, 2 foot principal. And we could hear how those sound. So again, very characteristic sound of the pipe organ. 3 octaves sounding there, 8 foot, 4 foot, and 2 foot. And we have, as I mentioned, both a principal and a diapason here. The principal that you just heard, sort of average size principal for backbone sound of the organ. We also have over here open diapason, and it's octave higher, octave diapason. And these are older pipes that came from the organ that was originally in the Church of the Transfiguration on Euclid Avenue. And the diocese very kindly let us take the remaining pipes out of that building just shortly before it was demolished. So these are pipes that were built in the early 1920s, and in those days, sounds of this nature were generally bigger. The pipes are fatter around, they're bigger diameter, and the sound correspondingly larger. In a building like Trinity, we can stand that sort of sound. So here's the 8-foot open diapason. Contrasting with the 8-foot principal. The 8 and 4 diapason. The regular. So you can hear they have just a different size, different amount of warmth, different tone color to them. They can be combined as well, and we get a lot of sound then. I'm going to add to that the 2-foot diapason and the 16-foot that's on the grate. So we'll have a whole big family of sound. So that's sort of the core sound of this organ. I mentioned 16-foot stops, which are an octave lower than normal keyboard pitch. We have one 16-foot on our great division here. It's called a 16-foot Gemshorn. I know, it's an interesting stop name. But you can hear it's a low-pitched sound, especially in this bottom octave. So it's very much akin to the cello or the double bass, and it has that purry sort of, it's almost like you can hear the bow on the string. It has that grittiness to it, which is really a nice thing. So it gives real fundamental and foundation to the sound. That stop plays also at 8-foot pitch, regular keyboard pitch. I mentioned it's called a Gemshorn. There's an animal called a gems, and some of you may have been to a zoo where they actually have gemses, and the gems has these beautiful curved horns. And early music groups back in medieval times, and some groups nowadays that play that type of music actually have physical sets of gemshorns, and they are these curved horns from the animal called a gems. Holes drilled in them, so you cover the holes with your fingers, and it's a gorgeous sort of a silvery sound. I've only heard them a few times in my life, but this sound on the organ is a little bit like it. It's a very good blending sound. It blends with other stops really nicely. So we've got that Gemshorn that's sort of a hybrid sound. We have flutes on the great division. Here's our 8-foot flute. So flute tone on the organ is more hollow, it's more transparent. You could say it's a little maybe more cool in nature. It's not so warm as principal tone. So that's the principal. That's the flute, Gemshorn. We could combine Gemshorn and flute. 4-foot flute, so that sounds an octave higher than normal keyboard pitch. Really a beautiful sound. You can combine the flutes 8 and 4, of course. Here's the flute 8 with the principal 2. It's a real perky, bright sound, quite nice. One thing that I've ignored so far, there's some stops, instead of like 16, 8, 4, their numbers end with a fraction. And we have one of those. Those are called mutations in organ terminology, whose stop footage ends in a fraction. So we have a 2 2/3 stop here on the great. And as you might guess, instead of playing octaves, they play one of the notes in between, because they don't exactly divide or multiply in half. They go part way. So here is 8 foot, 4 foot, 2 2/3, 2 foot. So those of you that have a little acquaintance with musical instruments, I'm playing a C, and that when I draw the 2 2/3, it sounds a G. So it's not playing that note, it's playing Diam. So that's a mutation. It's part of the natural overtone series. If you've ever gone in the backyard and twirled a piece of hollow hose real quick, if you can twirl it really fast, you can get it to go to several of the natural overtone series. It'll go, when you go faster, it'll go, it'll go, you have to go really fast to get to some of the higher overtones. But the ancient Greeks first discovered and named those overtones, and they exist in all forms of natural sound, the organ being one of the chief vehicles. But if you play a violin, you can divide the string in half, and that gives you an overtone. You can divide the string in thirds, that gives you different overtones. So overtones exist in all musical instruments and in all forms of natural sound. One other stop that we have on the great is called a mixture, and it has a Roman numeral, and that tells how many notes are playing when I press one key here, how many pipes are playing. So in this case, our mixture is 4 ranks on the great. So when I press one key, there are 4 pipes playing. They're a little out of tune, but you can hear there's more than one. That's how it's supposed to be. So if I'm playing C, there are, I think, 2 C's and 2 G's playing. So it's about like that. Yep, you get that. So it's a better tune. It's that. So it's C, G, C, G. And again, that's overtones. They're very high and sort of sparkly, but they give the organ a sense of fullness and brilliance while still having clarity. So you can go. That's the mixture coming on and off, so it makes a really big change in the color. They're mostly small pipes, 2 foot and less, a lot of them almost pencil size, so it's a job to tune those pipes, as you could imagine. We have one reed stop that lives naturally on the great. It's an 8-foot trumpet. And you might remember reed stops on the organ have a vibrating reed that's made of brass, a very, very thin little piece of brass that when wind goes in the toe hole of the pipe, it sets that little piece of brass to vibrating, and the rest of the pipe serves as a resonator for that vibrating reed. So it's an 8-foot trumpet. If I have it playing even up and down an octave, it's a nice sort of middle of the road trumpet, not super bright, not super dull. So if we have the whole great division, sort of all the resources of it going, it's a big sound, and as I say, it's the core sound of any pipe organ. We have one color percussion stop that happens to live on the grate, and that's a set of chimes. So so that's an interesting color that we have not had in a long time here at Trinity Cathedral, but it can be very, very beautiful. So if you get that accompanied by some softer sound like can be a really nice percussion sound from the organ. So I think that is all of the colors that exist on our great division. And you'll recognize some of those sounds as you start to hear them more frequently in the months and years to come. So next week, we'll migrate northward one keyboard and talk about the swell division, which lives on the third keyboard up and has lots of different colors. The swell and the grate are arguably the two workhorse divisions of most pipe organs, and that is the case here. So, welcome to the Great Division, and we'll see you next week when we talk about the swell.